Tripod technical difficulties today, so we're on the webcam if you're asking why it looks different, but we're watching a CNN panel covering the controversial Trump pardons of Jan 6ers as he hands out over 1,500, including to violent criminals who assaulted police officers and stormed the Capitol to delay the peaceful transfer of power, and one of the most corrupt strokes of a pen ever carried out by a president, so I'm interested to hop in and see what context we can provide.
You know, the hundreds of people who were convicted of the George Floyd protests of assaulting police officers to walk free, right, Scott?
Well, they were prosecuted.
How many were prosecuted ultimately?
Hundreds
because there were lots of people that had all their charges dropped.
I have the answer for you, and it's hundreds of them.
Yeah, I saw an analysis. I saw an analysis that summer, and most people who were charged had their charges dropped.
But
so.
What charges were they?
I mean, all kinds of charges.
Failure to if they were failure to disperse, those types of charges. The ones who were charged with violent crimes, those charges were not dismissed. They were prosecuted.
Well, they went into all kinds of diversionary programs. I'm one of the few lawyers in this country that represented people in those riots and on January 6th, one of the very few. And the way that the prosecution was handled between those two groups are starkly different.
Don't you think that there is a
That's just
substantive difference between what happened on January 6th, what they were trying to do, and why the federal government has a desire and, in fact, a necessity to prevent that from ever happening again? Don't you think there's a substantive...
This clown at the end said, no, I hate Scott Jennings, but it's so objectively yes that it's not even close. It's not something worth hanging your hat on and losing all your credibility over. It's like saying, well, the guy who stole a candy bar only got a fine. Why did I get 10 years for stealing classified documents from the government? All we did was both steal, and then the president comes in and pardons the documents guy and instructs his AG to prosecute the one who stole the candy bar. That's comparable to what is happening here. The Jan 6ers broke into the Capitol looking for Congress members to assault or threaten, with the large goal of delaying the peaceful transfer of power, with those like the Oath Keeper and Proud Boys there for even more nefarious and planned out reasons, which is why they got seditious conspiracy. But they're all pardoned, again, from those who committed seditious conspiracy to overthrow the government and steal an election to those who assaulted police officers. Meanwhile, not a pardon was handed out by Trump to anyone at BLM, though any excuse Trump gave for pardoning the January 6ers, they've been locked up too long, this has been ruined, whatever it might be, applies to the BLM rioters just as well, but only the violent Jan 6ers gets pardoned. It's kind of like this is completely partisan and a politically corrupt move from Trump. And MAGA can never point to BLM again because at this point, all the violent criminals from BLM were prosecuted and not pardoned by Dems. They're not put up on a pedestal by Dems. Now, though, every violent criminal on January 6th has been pardoned by Trump. They were put on a pedestal by Trump. They're called hostages despite committing crimes. I mean, Republicans can no longer pretend that they actually value law and order.
You don't think there's a difference between trying to overturn an election and violent social justice protests?
Well, call it social justice. Okay.
I mean,
I'll
give it to you, Scott. Let's say that they're violent. You don't think there's a difference between trying to obstruct the peaceful transfer of power
here's what I think.
And violent riots in the street of any kind? The ones in 1968, the ones
What were
in
the objective of those riots?
I think both groups of people were mad about something going on. They wanted to change it. They took matters into their own hands that they should not have done. In both cases, you had people engaging in activities that they should not have engaged in. Now, our culture and our public discourse decided one group of people, social justice is good, and these people were bad. But the reality is they had the same motivation.
Here's the thing.
They all did the same thing.
Wait a second.
That had the same motivation.
They did not. They did.
No, they didn't.
Here's how you can tell that they're not the same. I can give you 100 examples of people rioting on the streets. I could give you hundreds of examples of large groups of people meeting together to protest and then it's spilling over to riots. Can any MAGA give me any other example of our peaceful transfer of power being successfully delayed? No, you cannot, because it literally does not exist. And the entirety of the situation was incited by Trump, which isn't something we should gloss over here because Trump knew that he lost. We know this from the indictments, and he was just angering these people and riling them up with the sole hope that he could then send them to the Capitol and they could pressure Mike Pence into accepting his fraudulent electors by breaking the Constitution. thus helping him steal the election. The larger motivation behind the January 6th was to steal an election. The more individualized motivation from those who were maybe at the rally, at the speech, and then, got riled up by his words and went, was to threaten and assault Congress members into successfully delaying the peaceful transfer of power, to strong arm them into doing what Trump wanted. The motivation behind BLM was to show police officers that police brutality isn't something that will be glossed over anymore. Violent actors on BLM were arrested, convicted, not pardoned. No Democrats campaigned on part of them, how Trump did MAGA. And again, most of the arrests from BLM weren't left-wing. They were right-wing bad actors anyway, and not the left, but we'll get into that.
There were people in protests. They were not riots. They were protests. And there were people who showed up at the protests and did bad behavior. But that was because a man was murdered unjustly.
That doesn't give you the right to break into the Nike store. That doesn't give you the right to break into Tiffany's.
What happened on January 6th is people went and stormed the Capitol because a man pouted and lost an election and couldn't stand up. Nobody died because of that election. People died because of Donald Trump's actions, and because, I don't know if it's the people you defend, but officers died on that day?
No. One guy had a heart attack 5 days later.
Okay.
No officers died.
Hold on. Officer Brian Sicknick, he had multiple strokes. He died by suicide. Officer Jeffrey Smith, Metropolitan Police.
Okay, how many cops die by suicide all the time?
I'm going to say their names, whether you like it or not.
You can
he
say
died by
everybody's
traumatic brain injury, and he died by suicide. Officer Howard Livingood, Capitol Police, died by suicide. Gunther Hashida, Metropolitan Police, died by suicide. Kyle DeFreytag, Metropolitan Police, died by suicide.
First off, rest in peace to each and every one of those police officers. Trump just eternally disrespected all of their souls and the honor in which they chose to give their lives serving, essentially, with these pardons. And MAGA does so as well by trying to pretend that all of these suicides were just coincidences and none of it had to do with their actions. Like, you're kind of disgracing the dead here. MAGA's riots led to multiple suicides. Their actions on that day caused these people to take their own life. They should own that. The stroke also most likely doesn't happen if that man wasn't involved in a massive riot where the stress levels were through the roof and he was heavily assaulted also days earlier. Also, hundreds of police officers were injured from attacks still. Other protesters were injured in attack. We spoke to a granny who had her head stepped on and stuff by people. But this is the point that I want to leave on, right? This is just another right-wing trick out of the playbook of fascism, and I don't think we should let them get away with it, especially anymore. No more weak Dems. This is legitimately what they did to the Black Panthers. They infiltrated them, made them seem violent. They would go to their protests and lash out. And then boom, you can take credibility from them because they're violent radicals and whoever supports them loses credibility as well. It's the exact same with Black Lives Matter. They didn't even try to hide it, where despite conviction records showing the majority of those arrested weren't leftist radicals or even politically motivated or members of BLM or anything like that, the arrests were made up heavily of right-wingers, if not just those who are politically inactive, right? Like the Boogaloo Boys were there and made up a large number of arrests, and this is a far-right white supremacist organization. What happened was at these peaceful protests across the nation, bad actors infiltrated them and then took the opportunity to do bad things. And you can see how hard the right wants this narrative to be true, which kind of gives away how it's by design as well. Because despite nobody on the left ever defending the violent acts, nobody on the left ever applauding the violent acts that happened, it's still used as a tool to take credibility from a crucial movement in Black Lives Matter and combating police racism and brutality. Because now if you're pro-BLM, you're pro-BLM riots, even though, again, lacks a lot of nuance in saying that. But it's also used as a cudgel against anyone on the left. Now, anytime that the right's proclivity for violence comes back on the forefront, whether it be mass shootings motivated by right-wing ideology or the January 6th riots, whatever it might be, they can always go, but BLM, right? Because we've allowed them to, in large part, and in part because of their control of the media, allowing them to create narratives like this that will stick. But I think it's time that we stop letting this fly. Like Kyle Kulinski said, no more weak Dems. I'm tired of playing these delusional MAGA games and feeling like we have to pretend they're reality or that MAGA actually believes this nonsense and isn't using it as a smoke shield for bigotry. I think we should just start calling out the bullshit because it's so enormous. And I think the fact that we try to give credence to some of the bullshit and pretend they actually believe it and we're just going to show them why they're wrong is why now these other places where bullshit is getting called out, they're like, well, it's bias and da-da-da-da. people don't understand how heavily skewed facts are just towards the left right now, where the left almost has a monopoly on facts because the right is led by a man who will just lie and say anything that benefits him, and then his party under him will consolidate around those words to just give him more power. So yes, the left almost does have a monopoly on facts in that they're the only party who at least somewhat, they'll still lie too, but at least somewhat is obligated by the truth, where Republicans have thrown that completely out the window. So it's like, of course, fact checks would hit more conservatives than liberals. And the fact that we're pretending that is a knock on the fact checks and not conservatives is insane to me.